Welcome, and settle yourself into a comfortable place. Let your eyes rest, let your breathing slow, and imagine the sound of soft rain outside a window. Tonight, we are traveling far back in time, to a world where life was slower, darker, and filled with the quiet rhythm of survival. A world of stone walls, smoky hearths, and the echo of church bells drifting across green fields. This is the Middle Ages, a time when kings and peasants, lords and labourers, monks and merchants all shared one thing in common: the struggle to live. But tonight, we will not look through the eyes of knights or queens. We will see this world through the eyes of its smallest and often forgotten people, its children. Many of them left no writings, no portraits, no songs. Their names were never recorded in books. Yet they lived, laughed, worked, and dreamed just as you do. They played in muddy streets, carried water from wells, and whispered secrets to one another before falling asleep on straw beds under heavy wool blankets. We will explore what it meant to grow up in a world before toys, before childhood as we know it, before school as we understand it. We will discover how medieval boys and girls learned their place in a society where every action, every task, and every dream was shaped by class, faith, and duty. So, take a deep breath and let your imagination drift. Picture the flicker of a candle on a wooden table, the creak of floorboards, the faraway call of a rooster in the morning mist. If you haven't already, pull your blanket a little closer, make yourself cozy, and let your mind wander back through time. And while you're here, you're invited to subscribe for more quiet journeys into history. Leave a comment to share where in the world you're tuning in from. It's always wonderful to know who's joining us across the centuries. Now close your eyes if you wish, and listen as our story begins. Imagine waking up not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of a church bell echoing over the rooftops. The year is somewhere around 1350. The air smells of wood smoke, damp straw, and bread baking somewhere in the distance. You are a child, but that word does not mean what it means today. In fact, in this world, the idea of childhood barely exists. The French historian Philippe Ariès, writing many centuries later in 1960, argued that in medieval times, people did not really see children as children. They were seen more as small adults, bodies not yet full grown, but minds expected to obey, work, and learn as soon as they were able. The Middle Ages did not celebrate youth the way we do now. There were no school playgrounds, no children's clothes, no special holidays made just for the young. When a baby was born, people were happy, yes, but cautious. They knew that life was fragile. Illness could sweep through a home like a shadow, and half of all children might never see their 5th birthday. Because of this, parents sometimes tried not to get too attached, fearing the pain of loss that could come at any time. Childhood was precious but short, and it faded quickly into work, responsibility, and faith. Picture a small stone house with a single fire burning in the center. A mother moves quietly, her hands rough from work. She does not coo or sing to her baby the way we might imagine. Instead, she wraps the child tightly in cloth, swaddled so it cannot move its arms, and sets it in a cradle by the warmth of the fire. To her, this is care, safety, and duty. Love is shown through labor, through feeding, washing, and keeping alive. By the time a child could walk steadily, they were already expected to help. They might carry small bundles of sticks for the fire, or chase away chickens from the garden. By the age of 7, many began their training in the family trade, or were sent away to live and learn with another household. For some, this meant learning to weave, bake, or tend livestock. For others, especially boys from noble families, it meant learning to read, to ride, and to serve. The separation between child and adult was almost invisible. There were only the weak and the strong, the obedient and the disobedient, the innocent and the sinful. The church taught that all humans were born with sin, even newborns. Baptism was seen as the washing away of that sin, the first step into the great spiritual order that shaped every medieval life. For the poor, there was little time to dream or play. The day began early, often before dawn, and ended with the setting sun. Life followed the rhythm of seasons, planting, harvesting, tending animals, and surviving the cold months when food grew scarce. A child might sit quietly beside a mother spinning wool, watching the spindle twist the fibers into thread. Or they might follow their father to the fields, learning the slow, heavy work of ploughing and sowing. There was no school bell ringing at 8 in the morning, no homework waiting at night. Learning came through doing, through repetition, observation, and imitation. A blacksmith's son learned the rhythm of hammer on metal. A farmer's daughter learned the pattern of kneading bread. Skills were passed like heirlooms, not written in books, but lived in the body, taught by sight, sound, and endless practice. Still, children did play. Even in the hardest times, there was laughter. In village lanes, children might chase each other with sticks, roll hoops, or toss stones into circles scratched into the dirt. Some made simple dolls from scraps of cloth or carved toys from bits of wood. Richer children had balls stuffed with rags or pigs' bladders, painted wooden horses, or small figures made from pewter. The games were simple, but joy did not need much in this world. As children grew, their lives began to divide by gender. A boy's path led toward trade, labor, or perhaps the church. A girl's path curved toward the hearth, the home, and marriage. A noble daughter might learn music, embroidery, and manners to prepare her for a future as a wife of rank. A peasant girl learned to milk goats, mend clothes, and cook over the fire. Both knew that their lives were part of a larger design, one that rarely allowed choice. In towns where streets were crowded and noisy, apprenticeships became the bridge between childhood and adulthood. Around 12 or 13, a boy might be sent to live with a master craftsman, a baker, weaver, or tanner. His parents would pay a fee or make an agreement. The boy would now belong to another household, sleeping in a corner of the workshop, eating meals with the family, and learning through work. He would be scolded, corrected, perhaps beaten, but also trained and protected. The master was like a second father, strict but responsible for the boy's welfare. The apprentice promised not to gamble, drink, or visit taverns, and not to fall into bad company. He would spend years learning his craft until one day he could produce a masterpiece, proof that he was ready to work on his own. Only then could he call himself a master and open his own shop. Girls, too, worked young. Some were apprenticed to women who taught them sewing or cooking. Others entered service in noble houses where they cleaned, carried, and cared for others. In these places, they saw how the rich lived: fine clothes, large banquets, and endless rules of behavior. Yet even among the wealthy, girls were watched closely, expected to be modest, silent, and obedient. A daughter's reputation was the family's honor, and even small mistakes could bring shame. It may sound harsh to us now, but in many ways, this was the structure that kept the medieval world turning. Childhood was not a time to explore identity or follow dreams. It was preparation, a careful shaping of the next generation to fit into the same system that had existed for centuries. Every person had their place, from the humblest farmhand to the mightiest lord, and a child's duty was to learn that place quickly. And yet, within that order, there were moments of tenderness. A mother might brush her child's hair by candlelight. A father might carve a small toy after a long day's work. A monk teaching letters to a young student might smile quietly at their mistakes. Affection existed, though it was shown in different ways, quieter and less visible than ours today. When we think of the Middle Ages, we often imagine castles, knights, and wars. But most people never saw a battle or a crown. They lived in villages where the seasons ruled, and survival was a shared task. For a child, growing up meant learning the rhythm of that world: when to rise, when to rest, when to pray, and when to work. Childhood ended not with a birthday or ceremony, but simply when the world demanded more from you. As you listen, let yourself imagine the soft glow of firelight, the sound of footsteps on wooden floors, the smell of earth and wool. Think of those young lives that pass through this quiet, ordered world, sometimes harsh, sometimes kind, but always human. In the next segment, we'll step further into the lives of medieval children as they leave the home and enter their first apprenticeships. We'll see how work, faith, and duty shaped their days, and how even in such a structured society, some still found small ways to dream. The morning bell of the parish church rings again, calling not only the faithful to prayer but the living to labor. In a small town surrounded by farmland, the streets are just beginning to stir. Smoke curls from the chimneys, the smell of bread drifts through narrow lanes, and the voices of people starting their day blend into a low hum. Among them is a boy of perhaps 12. His hands still small, but his face already carrying the quiet seriousness of work. He has left his home, perhaps forever, to become an apprentice. His mother gave him a piece of bread and a whispered blessing, and his father nodded once, proud but also uncertain. Now the boy lives with a master, a baker maybe, or a tanner, or a weaver. who will teach him a trade in exchange for obedience and effort. For many medieval children, this moment was the true beginning of adult life. An apprenticeship was both opportunity and burden. It promised a skill, a roof, and a future, but it also meant long hours, strict discipline, and separation from family. Inside the workshop, everything smells of the trade: hot yeast and flour if it is a bakery, wet hides and sharp lime if it is a tannery. Tools hang neatly on walls. The master's wife gives orders. Older apprentices hurry about, already knowing their tasks. The new boy watches, learns, and tries to stay out of trouble. Apprenticeship contracts were often formal. In some towns, they were even written down and sealed before witnesses. The document might say that the apprentice would serve faithfully for 7 years, receive food, clothing, and shelter, and not run away. In return, the master would teach him everything needed to become a craftsman. Life was not easy. Apprentices rose before dawn, swept floors, fetched water, and helped with every part of the work. A single mistake, burning a batch of bread, spilling dye, breaking a tool, could bring a harsh word or even a strike across the back. Yet this was how skills were passed, hand to hand, mind to mind. The rhythm of work was its own language, and every noise, the ring of hammer, the hiss of steam, the scrape of blade, carried meaning. In the evenings, when the day's work ended, apprentices ate with the master's family. The meal might be bread, porridge, and a little ale. Conversation was short. Sometimes the master told stories from his youth, affairs, travels, or guild meetings. The boy listened, half asleep, trying to picture a time when he would no longer be a servant, but a man with his own trade and name on a signboard. Guilds were powerful in medieval towns. Each trade had its own: the bakers, the tailors, the blacksmiths, the goldsmiths, the carpenters. They set prices, protected their members, and decided who could work where. A master was a respected citizen, someone who had proven both skill and honesty. Becoming one required years of training and a final test called the masterpiece. Only the best were accepted, and those who failed might spend their lives as assistants or wanderers, moving from town to town in search of work. For girls, the path was different but no less demanding. A girl might also leave home at 12 or 13, sent into service in another household. There she would clean rooms, cook meals, mend clothing, and care for children younger than herself. If her employers were kind, she might learn manners, sewing, and recipes she could use one day in her own home. If they were harsh, she could face long hours and little rest. Servants were expected to be invisible, always working, always polite, always humble. Service was not always cruel, though. Many households treated their young servants as part of the family. They might eat at the same table, share jokes in the kitchen, and sleep near the warmth of the hearth. Over time, some grew deeply loyal to the families they served. A few were even left gifts or money when their masters died. Still, both apprentices and servants learned quickly that the world ran on hierarchy. Everyone had someone above them to obey, and someone below them to command. The master obeyed the guild obeyed the town council, and all were bound by the rules of the church. Even the smallest action, like eating before the master or speaking too loudly, could be seen as pride, a sin that needed correction. For a young person, this structure gave life both safety and weight. You always knew what to do, but rarely had the chance to decide for yourself. The church reinforced this order with constant teaching. Obedience, humility, patience. The world was seen as a ladder reaching from the poorest peasant to God in heaven, and each rung had its proper place. Despite this, young people still found ways to laugh and dream. In towns, apprentices gathered in groups, singing songs as they carried goods through the streets. They might sneak out at night to join festivals, dancing with ribbons around a maypole or throwing snowballs in winter. On feast days, the strictness of work gave way to celebration. Masters, servants, and apprentices drank, ate, and sometimes played rough games together. For a little while, the distance between ranks blurred, replaced by music, food, and laughter. Those same festivals also gave apprentices a taste of freedom. Some saved money to travel when their contracts ended. They might walk for days between towns, carrying letters of recommendation, seeking new masters. Others stayed, married, and took pride in their place within the guild and community. Girls in service also faced turning points. After years of labor, some saved enough to marry a local craftsman or farmer. A few entered convents, where they could live a life of prayer and study, and some remained in service all their lives, caring for others with quiet dignity. The medieval world was not gentle, but it was built on deep patterns of learning, loyalty, and endurance. Every apprentice hammering metal, every servant stirring a pot, was part of something older than memory, a system that linked generations. A boy learning to bake in 1350 might teach his own son the same motions 40 years later. The trade, like a song passed by ear, survived even when its singers changed. When night came, apprentices curled up on straw beds near the workshop fire. The smell of ash and flour mixed with sleep. Some dreamed of their home, some of becoming masters, some of nothing at all. The town grew quiet except for the soft crackle of embers and the distant ringing of the last church bell. In that darkness, the work of another day waited patiently, ready to begin again with the dawn. In our next segment, we will step away from the towns and return to the countryside where most medieval children lived. There, far from guilds and workshops, their days were shaped by animals, crops, and the endless rhythm of the land. We will see what it meant to grow up as a peasant child, and how survival depended on every season and every hand. Imagine now that the sound of hammers and church bells fades away. The air smells different, less of smoke, more of soil. You are standing at the edge of a wide green field, where the earth stretches toward a distant forest. This is the countryside, the heart of the medieval world. Here lived most of the children of the Middle Ages. They were the sons and daughters of peasants, bound to the land, growing food for others, and learning early that every sunrise meant work. The rhythm of life in a peasant village followed the seasons. Children grew up not by counting birthdays, but by noticing what had to be done each month. Spring meant planting, summer meant tending crops, autumn meant harvesting, winter meant mending, feeding animals, and waiting for warmth to return. Even the smallest children had tasks. A 5-year-old might carry sticks for the fire, chase away birds from seeds, or guard a few geese. Older children took care of animals, weeded gardens, and fetched water from the well. By 10 or 12, they could handle the plough, swing a scythe, or help with the hay. There was no real line between childhood and adulthood, only the slow growth of strength and responsibility. Clothing was simple. Most children wore rough wool tunics in brown, grey, or faded green. Shoes were rare and many went barefoot, their feet tough from fields and mud. In winter, they wrapped themselves in cloaks or old sheepskins, sharing heat by sitting close to the fire. Inside their houses, the air was thick with smoke, for most homes had no chimney, just a hole in the roof where the smoke could drift out slowly. Their homes were small, often with only one main room. The floor was made of packed earth, sometimes covered with straw. A fire burned in the center, used for both cooking and warmth. At one end, a few animals might be kept inside during cold months. Chickens, a pig, maybe even a cow. The smell of life filled every corner, hay, sweat, and smoke. For a peasant child, this was not unpleasant, just normal. It was home, food depended on the harvest. In good years they ate bread, pottage, a thick soup made of barley, beans, and vegetables, and sometimes cheese or eggs. Meat was a luxury, saved for feast days, or borrowed from the Lord's forest, if one was brave enough to risk hunting there. In bad years, meals grew smaller. Children learned to be thankful for anything that filled their stomachs. Though life was hard, the countryside had its quiet joys. Children played with whatever the world offered: sticks, stones, bits of cloth. They played tag among the trees, rolled hoops down the path, or tried to balance on fences. In some villages, they carved wooden toys, spun tops, or played ball games using bundles of rags. Laughter echoed through the fields, just as it does today, for even the poorest child could find joy in a moment of rest. There were also festivals, and those were days of wonder. At harvest time, the villagers sang, danced, and feasted together. Children watched as men built tall bonfires. Women brought loaves of bread shaped like sheaves of wheat, and the church bells rang in celebration. Sometimes, a traveling musician or juggler passed through, and for one evening the entire village gathered to listen and watch. For those children, these moments were magic, brief windows into a world larger than their fields. But the work was endless. In spring, ploughing began as soon as the ground thawed. Boys led oxen, while their fathers steered the heavy wooden plough. Girls helped their mothers plant seeds, their hands cold from the damp soil. In summer, the sun burned hot, and everyone worked long hours to keep weeds away. In autumn, they bent over the fields from dawn until dark, cutting and tying bundles of grain. If a storm came at the wrong time, or a sickness spread among the animals, the whole village could suffer. Peasant families belonged to manors, estates ruled by lords who owned the land. The peasants worked the fields in exchange for protection and a place to live. Children learned early that the land was not theirs. They paid rent through labor and goods. A portion of everything they grew went to the lord's granary. On some days, fathers and sons worked not for their own families, but for the manor, repairing fences or digging ditches. It was simply the way the world was ordered. Education for peasant children was rare. Most could not read or write, but they were not ignorant. They knew the weather, the soil, the seasons, and the signs of nature. They learned how to tell time by the sun and stars. They knew which plants could heal and which could harm. Knowledge came from memory, not from books. A child might never see a single page of writing, but could name every tool in the barn and every saint's day in the year. The church was the center of village life. Every Sunday, bells called everyone to Mass. Children sat quietly beside their parents, hearing stories of heaven and sin, though few understood the Latin words. Priests taught that obedience and faith would bring reward after death. For many, religion offered comfort in a world that could be cruel and uncertain. When a child fell ill, parents prayed for healing and sometimes promised to light candles at the altar if recovery came. When death came, as it often did, they accepted it as God's will, though the sorrow never lessened. Life expectancy was short, and disease was common. Peasant children faced hunger, fevers, and accidents from a young age. But those who survived learned resilience. They grew strong through labor, wise through necessity, and hopeful through habit. The same hands that milked cows or sowed grain as children would one day do the same as parents, passing down the same knowledge, the same prayers, the same rhythm of life. At night, after supper, families gathered near the hearth. The only light came from the fire, which flickered across tired faces. Someone might tell a story, perhaps a local legend, or a tale of saints, or even a ghost story whispered to make the younger ones shiver. The smallest children fell asleep on the floor, their hair smelling of smoke and hay. Outside, the wind moved softly through the darkened fields, and the stars shone above like a watchful roof. In that world, childhood was short, but it was not meaningless. It was a time of learning, of belonging, of growing into the pattern of life that had existed for centuries. To be a child of the fields was to understand work, endurance, and the turning of the seasons more deeply than most people ever will today. As the fire burned lower and the last voices faded into silence, another day ended in the same way as countless before it, quietly, without hurry, without change. And with the first light of dawn, the fields would call again, and the children would rise to answer. In our next segment, we will leave the fields and step into the world of learning and faith. We will explore what it meant to study in a medieval monastery, how children became monks or nuns, and why education was seen as a holy calling. Imagine the sound of the countryside fading into stillness. The wind softens, the fields fall behind, and stone walls rise ahead. A bell rings again, not from a village church, but from a tall monastery tower. It echoes slowly over gardens and cloisters. Inside these walls, life follows a different rhythm, one of prayer, study, and silence. Here, some children of the Middle Ages spent their youth. They were not farmers or apprentices. They were novices, young boys and girls given to God. Some came because their families could not afford to raise them. Others came as an offering of faith, or as a way to gain learning and safety in uncertain times. To cross the monastery gate was to step into another world, one ruled by bells, not seasons, and by obedience, not coin. Picture a narrow dormitory lit by the faint glow of dawn. A group of boys stirs on straw beds, their wool blankets rough against their skin. When the bell sounds, they rise quietly, wash in cold water, and dress in plain robes. Their day begins not with games or chatter, but with the first prayers of the morning. The chapel is cold, the air filled with the scent of wax and stone. Voices chant together, deep and slow, the same Latin words that have been sung for generations. After prayers comes study. Books are precious, and few can read them at first. A boy of 7 might start by tracing letters on a wax tablet, copying lines with a stylus until the shapes become familiar. A monk or teacher watches closely, correcting his hand, guiding his pronunciation. Education here is not only about reading or writing, it is about discipline, faith, and the shaping of the soul. Every lesson is a kind of devotion. In the scriptorium, older boys copy texts onto parchment. The room smells of ink, glue, and animal skin. They sit at long wooden desks, bent over pages for hours. Each letter must be perfect. Mistakes waste precious materials, so they work slowly, breathing carefully so the quill does not blot. The sound of scratching pens fills the silence, joined sometimes by the soft flutter of pages or the distant footsteps of a passing abbot. Girls also lived religious lives, though separately, within convents. Their world was quieter still. A young girl entering as a novice might be only 10 or 12. She would learn to read, sew, and sing psalms. Some convents were centers of learning where women studied languages, wrote poetry, and even composed music. A few, like Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century, became famous for their wisdom and visions, writing books on nature, medicine, and faith. Life in these places was ordered and predictable. Bells marked every part of the day. There were bells for waking, for prayer, for work, for meals, and for rest. A monk or nun's time was not their own. Each moment was given to God, through labor, reading, or silence. Yet many found peace in this structure. The world outside was full of wars, plagues, and poverty. Inside the cloister, there was safety, food, and purpose. Meals were simple: bread, vegetables, and ale, eaten in silence while one member read aloud from scripture. Afterward came more study, gardening, or copying texts. The gardens were carefully tended, filled with herbs used for medicine. Children learned to recognize mint, sage, and rosemary, to grind dried roots, and to mix healing salves. The smell of herbs blended with the damp scent of stone corridors. Though discipline was strict, many novices looked back with gratitude. They had escaped hunger, learned to read and write, and gained a kind of education rare for their time. Still, it was not an easy life. Silence was required for long stretches of the day. Talking too much could bring punishment, perhaps extra prayers or fasting. A novice who longed for home could only whisper his worries during confession. Letters were rare, and leaving was almost impossible once vows were taken. Some children entered monasteries not by choice, but by family decision. A younger son, for example, might be sent to the church so the family's land would remain with the eldest brother. For noble families, this was common. It was seen as a gift to God, ensuring favor for the household and a respected future for the child. Even kings and queens placed their children in monasteries, at least for a few years, to be educated in reading, writing, and manners. Despite the silence, the cloister was not empty of sound. There was the steady rhythm of chanting, the drip of water in fountains, the ring of tools in the workshop, and the chirping of birds in the gardens. All these sounds blended into a peaceful hum that carried through stone halls. The pace of life here taught patience and endurance. A child who entered as a novice might spend his entire life within these same walls, aging slowly as new generations arrived to take his place. Education in monasteries helped preserve the knowledge of the ancient world. The works of Aristotle, Virgil, and other classical authors survived because monks copied them by hand. Even when wars destroyed cities, monasteries remained islands of learning. A boy trained in Latin here could one day serve as a clerk, teacher, or even a royal advisor. In a world where few could read, this was a great power. And yet, for many children, it was also a lonely path. There were no families, no festivals, no play in the open fields. Their joys came from small things: the warmth of sunlight on a cloister wall, the rhythm of a familiar hymn, the turning of a well-made page. The monastery taught them to find peace in repetition, beauty in silence, and purpose in service. When night fell, the candles burned low. Novices knelt again in prayer before sleep, the dormitory filled with the soft rustle of robes and the gentle murmur of whispered psalms. Outside, the wind moved through the cloister garden, stirring the leaves of the herb beds. The bell rang once more, deep and low, marking the end of another perfectly ordered day. These children would grow into the keepers of books and faith, the unseen guardians of knowledge during centuries of uncertainty. Through them, the written word survived, carrying the thoughts of one age into the next. In their quiet devotion, they shaped the memory of the medieval world itself. In our next segment, we will leave the peace of the monastery and return to the noise and colour of medieval towns. There, childhood took a different shape, one filled with trade, guilds, and the first glimpses of a changing world. The morning is damp and grey, a heavy mist curling through the narrow lanes of a medieval town. The cobblestones glisten with moisture, and the smell of wet straw mixes with wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, slow and hollow, calling the town's few children toward the place that passes for a school. You walk there with bare feet, clutching a small slate board under your arm. Your tunic is rough wool, itchy against your skin, and your stomach is already growling. There will be no breakfast today, not unless your family is one of the lucky ones. Most mornings, your teacher expects you to arrive hungry and humble. After all, in his eyes, learning is not supposed to be pleasant. The classroom is not much of a room at all. It's a dim space attached to the back of a church or monastery. The floor is made of hard-packed earth. The windows are tiny slits that let in only thin beams of light, and the air smells faintly of wax and damp wood. The benches are uneven and splintery, and if you are late, you must sit on the floor. Your teacher, a man known as a magister, or sometimes simply the clerk, wears a long robe that once might have been black. Now it's more of a muddy brown. He is strict, proud, and very aware that you and your classmates come from poor families. In his hand, he carries a stick, smooth and polished from years of use. It is not just for pointing at the board. It is a reminder to sit still and pay attention. School in the Middle Ages is not a place of laughter or colour. There are no drawings on the walls, no friendly charts or decorations. The lessons are slow and repetitive, focused mostly on memorization. You repeat words from the Bible in Latin, a language you do not understand, trying to remember each sound exactly as the teacher says it. If you make a mistake, you are corrected sharply. If you make another, you may feel the sting of that stick across your knuckles. The sound of learning is not cheerful. It is a low murmur of children chanting lines again and again. Pater noster, qui es in celis. The words become like a rhythm, almost like a song, but there is little joy in it. The teacher walks up and down between the benches, his shoes scraping against the floor. He listens for errors and stops when he hears one. Then comes silence, a correction, and the murmur begins again. If you are lucky, you might have a small piece of chalk or charcoal to write on your slate. Most of your writing practice will involve copying simple letters or prayers. Paper is far too expensive, and books are treasures few will ever touch. The teacher might own only one, written by hand on thick parchment. When he reads from it, his voice lowers in respect, and you can feel the power that knowledge holds in this world. Learning Latin might seem strange to you. After all, no one speaks it in the market or at home. Your mother speaks the local language. Your father speaks the language of his work, words about tools, soil, and bread. But Latin belongs to the church and the educated. To learn it is to climb one tiny step above the crowd, though most children never make it that far. Sometimes the lessons stretch for hours, broken only by moments of quiet prayer. Your body aches from sitting still. The dirt beneath your feet grows cold. You listen as rain begins to fall outside, dripping through cracks in the roof. It sounds soft, almost comforting, and for a moment your mind drifts away. You imagine running through puddles or watching clouds pass. Then a sharp voice calls your name and you're pulled back into the dim room. For many children, schooling ends quickly. Families cannot afford to lose helping hands, and after a few months or years, the lessons stop. The teacher writes your name in a small list, and you are sent back to the fields or the workshop. Education is a privilege, not a right. Only those destined for the church or born into wealth will continue. Still, even this short time leaves a mark. You might not understand every prayer you recited, but you remember the rhythm, the feeling of sitting among others, the strange comfort of rules and repetition. For some, it becomes a memory of frustration. For others, it is a spark of something bigger, a quiet wish to know more. Imagine now, as the day ends, you step out into the grey afternoon. The air feels fresh after the close darkness of the classroom. You look up at the bell tower, where a thin rope sways in the wind, and you wonder what lies beyond your small town. Somewhere, there are men and women who can read every word in those Latin books, who can write letters that travel across kingdoms. You have glimpsed their world, even if just for a moment. The path home is muddy. Your feet sink with each step, but you do not mind. The lessons may have been harsh, but you feel something growing inside you, a mix of curiosity and pride. You have seen what learning costs in the Middle Ages, and somehow you survived the classroom without comfort. As the last bell fades, the town settles into quiet. The fire smoke drifts low, and your thoughts drift with it. Tomorrow will bring work, chores, and maybe another day of lessons if fortune allows. But tonight, you have earned rest, so breathe deeply. Listen to the soft crackle of a hearth, the distant sound of rain on rooftops, and the slow rhythm of footsteps fading down the lane. You are a child of the Middle Ages, doing your best in a world that asks much and gives little. Sleep will come soon. The next chapter of your childhood begins not in a field or a classroom, but in a workshop that smells of smoke, leather, and sweat. The air hums with the rhythm of tools, hammers striking iron, knives cutting wood, looms clacking in slow, steady patterns. You are no longer just a child now. You are an apprentice, which in the Middle Ages is both an opportunity and a quiet kind of captivity. The day begins before sunrise. The streets are still dark, only the faint glow of lanterns lighting your way. You step through puddles and straw until you reach the workshop door, already open, a sign that your master is awake. He greets you not with a smile but with a short nod. There is no good morning. Instead, he says, get to work. Your apprenticeship might last 7 years, sometimes more. During that time, you live under your master's roof, obey his rules, eat his food when he allows it, and sleep on a pile of straw in a corner of the shop. In return, you learn his trade: blacksmithing, weaving, carpentry, tanning, or baking. Each trade has its own sounds, its own smells, and its own dangers. If you are apprenticed to a blacksmith, your world is filled with fire. The forge burns bright, and sparks leap into the air like tiny stars. The heat is so strong that your skin stays red and dry. You spend your days turning a heavy bellows to feed the flames, fetching iron bars, carrying water, and sweeping ash. You are too young to shape metal yet, but you dream of the day your hands will guide the hammer, and your name will be known for good work. If you are a baker's apprentice, your mornings begin even earlier. You rise before dawn to knead dough by hand, your fingers sticky with flour and yeast. The warmth of the oven feels like a blessing on cold mornings, but the work never stops. You carry trays, you clean ashes, you run errands across the town. By the time others wake up to buy their bread, you are already exhausted. Apprenticeship is not only work, it is discipline. Your master has the right to punish you if you are lazy, clumsy, or disobedient. Sometimes he uses harsh words. Sometimes his belt. Medieval life does not see children as fragile. You are expected to endure, to learn through pain and patience. And yet, there are moments of pride. When your master finally trusts you to hold a tool or shape a piece of wood, your heart swells. You begin to understand the rhythm of the work, the sound of iron cooling in water, the scent of newly planed timber, the glow of a finished piece that you helped create. In those moments, you glimpse the strange beauty of craftsmanship, the quiet satisfaction of making something real. Evenings are not for rest. After the day's labor, you eat whatever your master's household provides. Usually thin stew, coarse bread, and maybe a piece of cheese if the week has been good. You listen as the older apprentices whisper stories about their dreams. Some want to become journeymen, traveling from town to town to find work. Others want to save enough to open their own shop. You perhaps just want to survive the years ahead. Your apprenticeship also teaches you obedience. Every task, no matter how small, is a lesson in patience. You learn to sweep the floor perfectly, to stack tools in exact order, to polish the same piece of metal again and again. You are reminded that in the Middle Ages, even small mistakes can bring punishment, or worse, shame. Sometimes when the workshop grows quiet at night, you think about your family. You miss your mother's voice, your father's rough laughter, the sound of siblings playing. You are part of your master's household now, but not truly part of it. You are both servant and student, bound by an unspoken promise. If you endure, one day you will have a skill no one can take from you. The seasons pass and you grow stronger. Your hands develop calluses, your back aches from long hours, but your movements become steady. You begin to understand the secret pride that craftsmen carry. The pride of knowing that their work, not their words, defines them. Still, some apprentices never finish. Illness, accidents, or cruel masters can end the journey early. The forge burns too hot. The loom catches fire. The streets outside are not safe at night. Childhood in the Middle Ages is fragile, and apprenticeship, though it offers hope, can also break the spirit. But if you endure, if you last through the years of silence and scolding, you emerge changed. You no longer see the world as a child. You walk taller, your eyes sharper, your hands marked with the story of labor. At the end of your training, if fortune smiles, your master releases you. He gives you a small letter, proof of your learning, and calls you a journeyman. You are free to travel, to find new work, to carry your craft from town to town. It is freedom, yes, but also a test. The world beyond the workshop is wide and uncertain. For now, though, as the fire fades and your master closes the shutters, you rest your head on your straw bed. The embers glow dimly, painting the walls in soft orange light. Outside, you can hear the night settling over the town, the clatter of a cart, the bark of a dog, the toll of a distant bell. You close your eyes and let your tired body sink into the quiet. You are no longer just a child. You are an apprentice in the Middle Ages, learning not only a craft, but the art of endurance. Sleep comes slowly, like a friend who knows you've worked enough for one day. The town is waking, but not everyone has a bed to rise from. In the shadows between the narrow wooden houses, the stray children of the Middle Ages begin their day. They are the ones without families, or the ones whose families have nothing left to give. Some lost their parents to famine, others to plague, and some were simply left behind because there was not enough food to share. You can picture it now. The cold dawn light touching the roofs, smoke curling from chimneys, while children huddle beneath market stalls or church porches. Their clothes are torn and too thin for the season. Some wear scraps of old cloaks, others wrap themselves in straw or rags. The ground beneath them is damp, and the smell of rot and refuse fills the air. In a medieval town, poverty is visible everywhere, yet few stop to help. People believe misfortune is a sign of God's will. A poor child begging for bread might be pitied, but rarely invited inside. If you are one of these children, the day begins with hunger, and the first task is survival. You start by searching for scraps. Behind the bakery, there might be crumbs swept into the street. Near the butcher's stall, a piece of bone with some meat still clinging to it. You learn which market stalls throw out their waste, and which shopkeepers chase beggars away with sticks. Every discovery feels like treasure. Even a crust of hard bread, or a wilted cabbage leaf. Sometimes, a priest or monk gives you food near the church. They call it charity, but you know it comes with a price. Long prayers, or work in the yard, or carrying water for the kitchen. Still you are grateful. The church at least believes the poor have souls that must be saved, even if their bodies are dirty and thin. The streets are noisy and dangerous. Carts rumble over cobblestones, horses snort, and dogs fight for scraps. Grown men step over you without looking down. You learn to stay out of the way, to move quickly and quietly. Sometimes older children form groups for protection, sleeping together under archways or near the town walls. You might share food, tell stories, or keep watch for thieves. But trust is fragile. Hunger can turn friends into rivals by nightfall. Some stray children try to earn a few coins. You might carry buckets of water from the well, sweep shop floors, or run errands for busy merchants. Others sing or play simple instruments for coins, their small voices echoing through the market. The kindest townsfolk toss a copper piece or two. Others sneer or mock. Then there are those who fall into darker paths. Petty theft becomes a way to survive, snatching apples, sneaking bread, or slipping a hand into an open pocket. Punishment, if caught, is harsh. A beating in the street, or worse, a day in the stocks, where everyone can see and throw rotten food. Medieval justice has little patience for hungry children. At night, the town changes. The warmth of the market fades, and cold air settles in. Fires burn in the homes of the wealthy, their windows glowing with orange light. You can smell roasted meat and hear laughter through the shutters. For the poor, the streets grow silent except for the creak of the wind and the scurry of rats. You find shelter where you can, a barn, a ruined wall, the hollow beneath a bridge. The stones are cold, but you are used to that now. Still, even in this hard life, there are moments of small kindness. A woman might leave bread outside her door by accident. A merchant might look the other way when you take an apple. Another child might share a blanket or a handful of peas. In the darkest places, compassion flickers like a candle. Some street children are taken in by monasteries or guilds. If you are lucky enough to be chosen, you might become a servant, sweeping floors or tending fires. You exchange freedom for safety, hunger for discipline. Others are not so fortunate. They remain ghosts of the streets, seen but not remembered, growing up wild and wary. And yet there is a strange resilience in these children. They learn to laugh in the face of misery, to play games with pebbles or sticks, to find joy in a patch of sunlight or a warm corner. Their laughter is thin, but it is real. Even in a world that forgets them, They refuse to disappear completely. Imagine now that you are one of them, sitting by a crumbling wall as the sun sets. The church bell tolls in the distance, marking Vespers. You pull your knees close and watch the light fade over the rooftops. For a moment, the town looks almost beautiful. The sky streaked with gold and purple, the air filled with the faint scent of wood smoke. You think of the day that just passed, the near misses, the moments of fear, the brief kindnesses, and you wonder what tomorrow will bring. Maybe another cold morning, maybe a better scrap of bread, maybe nothing at all. But still, you stay awake a little longer, watching the stars appear one by one. In this quiet moment, you realize something the adults never seem to see. Children, even poor ones, carry more courage than anyone imagines. You might not have a home or a bed, but you have the will to keep going, to keep finding small bits of light in a world that offers so little warmth. As the night deepens, you close your eyes under the blanket of dark sky. The town hums softly in its sleep. Somewhere a baby cries, a dog barks, and the last bell fades into silence. You drift between hunger and dreaming, between fear and hope. For now you survive. That is enough. In the Middle Ages, childhood did not last long. There was no gentle space between being a child and becoming an adult. Life itself was the teacher, and it expected you to learn fast. From the moment you could walk and talk, you were expected to help your family survive. Imagine a small stone cottage on the edge of a field. The walls are rough, and smoke drifts lazily from a hole in the roof. Inside, a family of 6 huddles around a fire that is more smoke than flame. There are no toys, no books, no spare time. If you are a child here, your first lessons are not in reading or writing, but in carrying water, feeding chickens, and collecting firewood. By the age of 7 or 8, you already have responsibilities. You know how to milk a goat, tie bundles of straw, or watch the younger children while your mother works in the fields. For peasant families, survival depends on every pair of hands, no matter how small. Work is constant. The day begins at sunrise and ends when the sky turns black. You follow the rhythm of the land, the sowing, the reaping, the seasons of hunger and plenty. If you are a boy, you might dream of one day ploughing your own field. If you are a girl, you might learn to bake bread, spin wool, or make ale. These are not hobbies, but skills that feed the family. Sometimes work feels like play. You laugh as you chase chickens, or find joy in splashing through streams while washing clothes. But as you grow older, you notice how heavy the buckets feel, how your hands grow rough, and how quickly laughter fades when food runs short. For children in towns, the pattern is different, but no easier. At 10 or 12, many are sent to serve in another household. It is called going into service. You might become a maid, scullion, or stable boy. You sweep floors, carry water, light fires, or run errands. In return, you get food, clothes, and a place to sleep. At first, it is frightening. You are far from home, surrounded by strangers. You must remember to speak only when spoken to bow or curtsy, and to obey without question. The mistress might be kind, or she might not be. There are no parents to defend you. But over time, you learn how to move quietly, how to avoid anger, and how to make yourself useful. Children of noble families have different duties. They are not spared from hard work, but their work is of another kind. A young noble boy might be sent away at age 7 to serve as a page in another lord's castle. There, he learns manners, swordplay, riding, and music. A noble girl might be sent to a convent or another household to learn embroidery, reading, and the art of conversation. Even for the wealthy, childhood means training for adult life. And adult life begins early. For many girls, marriage could come as soon as 12 or 13. Families often arranged matches to strengthen alliances or secure land. The girl might not meet her husband until the wedding day. She could still be more child than woman, but the law saw her as ready. Imagine a young girl standing before the church altar, her hands trembling as she says vows she barely understands. Her new husband might be twice her age. There are no choices, only expectations. Her duty is to keep house, bear children, and obey. It is a heavy weight for someone so young. Boys, too, are pushed into adulthood early. By 14 or 15, they are often working full days in the fields or workshops. At 16, some join the army or travel as apprentices to other towns. Few have the luxury of youth. Life demands strength, and weakness has no place in a world without safety nets. In some towns, children who worked in workshops or mines faced dangerous conditions. They crawled through narrow tunnels, carried heavy loads, or worked near sharp tools. There were no child labor laws, No doctors to heal broken bones. Injuries were common, but rest was rare. Yet even in this harsh world, moments of humanity remain. Families find ways to celebrate milestones. There are feast days, church festivals, and dances after harvest. Children still find laughter in games of tag, rolling hoops, or singing rhymes. These simple joys remind them that life, though short and hard, still holds beauty. Religion shaped much of this early adulthood. The church taught that suffering was a test of faith, and obedience was a virtue. Children learned to pray before meals, to cross themselves before work, and to fear the idea of sin. Heaven was the reward for endurance, hell, the punishment for disobedience. If you were lucky enough to live near a monastery, you might see monks teaching young novices. Some families sent their sons to join the church instead of a trade. It was a quieter life, filled with study, silence, and prayer. But even there, discipline ruled. Bells marked every hour, and every task had its order. So, by the time you reach 15 or 16 in the Middle Ages, you are no longer a child in anyone's eyes. You work, you obey, you endure. You might be married, apprenticed, or already caring for younger siblings. You have learned how to live within the narrow boundaries of your station. Still, you carry memories of play, the games in the dust, the sound of laughter, the moments before life became so serious. Those memories stay tucked away, small and bright, like coins hidden in a pocket. In a world where life is short and uncertain, growing up fast is not a choice. It is the only way to survive. And though childhood may seem lost to the weight of duty, the heart of a child still beats quietly inside, longing for warmth, rest, and a little piece of freedom. If you were lucky enough to learn how to read in the Middle Ages, it was probably thanks to the church. Education did not belong to everyone. It belonged to priests, monks, and those born into privilege. For most children, books were rare, mysterious things, filled with strange marks that only a few could understand. Imagine yourself now, walking through the heavy wooden doors of a monastery. The air is cool and smells of wax, parchment, and damp stone. A faint sound of chanting echoes through the long halls. This is where some medieval children began their education, a world of silence, discipline, and prayer. The monastery school is not like the schools we know today. There are no bright pictures, no chatter, no laughter. Instead, you hear the steady scratching of quills and the soft rustle of robes. Learning is a serious act, seen as a path to serve God. Every lesson begins and ends with prayer. You sit on a hard bench at a long wooden table. Before you is a wax tablet, or, if you are very fortunate, a scrap of parchment. Ink is made from soot or crushed plants, and the letters you trace belong to Latin, the language of the church. The monk in charge of your learning is called the magister, or master. He is patient but strict. If you make mistakes, he notices. Discipline is part of every lesson. Some monks believe that correction helps the soul grow stronger. A whispered word, a lost focus, or a messy letter could earn you a sharp tap with a rod. It is not done in cruelty, but as a way to remind you that learning is sacred and that order must be kept. The first things you learn are the alphabet and prayers. The Paternoster, the Lord's Prayer, is often the first text a child memorizes. Then come the psalms, the hymns, and the words of the Mass. You learn to read, not for fun, but for faith. Every word is a key to understanding God's world. As you grow more skilled, you begin to copy texts. You sit beside older boys in the scriptorium, the writing room of the monastery. It is a quiet place, brightened by tall windows and the steady light of candles. Here, monks copy holy books by hand, bending over their desks for hours. The smell of ink and vellum fills the air. You dip your quill carefully, trying to make smooth lines and even letters. Each page takes days, sometimes weeks. Mistakes are costly. Parchment is expensive and cannot be wasted. When you finally finish a page, you hold it up to the light and feel a small thrill of pride. Your letters are neat, your lines straight. In your heart, you hope that one day someone will read these words and feel closer to heaven. Outside the monastery, the world is rough and noisy, but inside, time feels slow and still. You rise before dawn to the sound of bells. You eat simple food, bread, cheese, a little broth, and spend hours in prayer and study. The rhythm of the day never changes. It is both comforting and strict. For some, this life is a calling. Boys from poor families sometimes find safety here. Food, shelter, and purpose, all provided by the monastery. For others, it feels like a cage, especially for children sent here against their will. Some never see their families again. The walls that protect them from the world also keep them trapped inside. Girls rarely attend such schools. Most female education takes place in convents, where nuns teach reading, sewing, and the keeping of accounts. Noble girls might learn to write letters, play music, or read religious texts. But very few ever hold a pen to copy scripture. For most, their lessons are about obedience, modesty, and piety. Even for boys, learning is never separate from faith. Knowledge is seen as dangerous if not guided by the church. Questions are allowed only within certain limits. Curiosity must serve belief, not challenge it. You learn to think carefully before speaking, to bow your head, to hide your doubts behind silence. Yet, beneath that silence, something begins to grow, a hunger for understanding. When you read about saints, you wonder what made them brave. When you copy passages about creation, you think of the world outside the monastery walls, the forests, the rivers, the people in the fields. You realize there is a larger story beyond the one written in your book. On feast days, the atmosphere changes. The monks sing, candles glow brighter, and special food is served. Maybe fish, honey cakes, or warm wine. The children laugh softly together, stealing a rare moment of joy. These small celebrations remind them that even in a strict life, there is room for light. As evening comes, the final bell rings. The air smells faintly of smoke and wax. You close your book, stretch your tired hands, and follow the others into the chapel. Shadows dance across the stone floor as you kneel to pray. Outside, the world continues. Carts rolling, dogs barking, people living their ordinary lives. But within these walls, time stands still. You whisper the final words of the day's prayer. In pace, dormiam et requiescam. I will lie down in peace and sleep. The words echo softly in the dark. They could belong to any child, in any age. And as you rest your head, you feel a quiet thought rise inside you. That learning, even when born in silence and fear, carries its own kind of freedom. Even in a world of hunger, disease, and hard work, medieval children still found time to play. Life was difficult, but play was their escape. Their one bright thread woven through days of chores, church bells, and scolding adults. Picture a small village square at dusk. Smoke drifts from thatched roofs, chickens scatter, and children run barefoot over the dusty ground. Their laughter echoes between wooden huts and the sound of a shepherd's horn calling from far away. There are no toy shops, no screens, no plastic dolls, yet the games are full of imagination. A stick becomes a sword, a pebble becomes treasure, and a puddle turns into an ocean. Play is simple, but it carries the same joy that children feel today. Let us step into their world and see what they did for fun. One of the most common games was hoop rolling. A child would take a wooden hoop, sometimes made from an old barrel, and run beside it, keeping it upright with a stick. The faster you ran, the harder it became to control, which made it exciting. Imagine the clatter of wooden hoops bouncing along the path, the shouts of triumph when someone could keep theirs rolling the longest. Then there was knucklebones, a game played with small animal bones, usually from sheep or pigs. It was like a mix between jacks and dice. Children tossed them into the air and tried to catch them in tricky ways. Richer children sometimes had pieces made of glass, clay, or even carved ivory. For the poor, bones from dinner worked just as well. Balls were also popular. Some were made from pig bladders, blown up and tied off, or stuffed with straw and sewn with leather scraps. Boys kicked them around in a rough, early version of football, which sometimes grew wild and chaotic. In towns, people played in the streets, knocking over market stalls and angering shopkeepers. Records show that kings had to ban the game because it caused so much trouble. Girls, on the other hand, had gentler games, though the line between girl and boy games was not strict. They played with dolls made from rags, carved wood, or clay. Some dolls had painted faces or bits of wool for hair. Others were simple bundles of fabric tied with string. A noble girl might have one dressed in miniature silks and lace. But for most, a doll was something made at home, often with love by a parent. Another favorite pastime was singing and circle games. Children joined hands, forming rings, and sang songs that passed from one generation to the next. Many of these rhymes survive in modern nursery songs, though their meanings are often forgotten. Some were about saints or the changing seasons, others about work, animals, or even bits of old superstition. In the countryside, Children played tag, hide and seek, and blind man's bluff. The rules changed from place to place, but the laughter was the same. They chased each other through fields, hid behind haystacks, or ducked into barns. In winter, they slid on frozen ponds, using bones or bits of wood as skates. When snow fell, they built forts and threw snowballs, though parents scolded them for wasting time. For poorer families, play often mixed with work. A child herding geese or watching sheep might carve toys from sticks, weave crowns from flowers, or make whistles from reeds. Even the smallest bit of free time became a chance for fun. In towns, festivals gave children a special kind of excitement. Fairs brought musicians, jugglers, and acrobats. During Feast of Fools or May Day, children wore paper crowns, painted faces with soot, and danced in the streets. Some carried garlands of flowers, others mimicked adults, pretending to be kings or priests. For a few hours the world turned upside down, and laughter ruled. Games were not just for the poor. Noble children played too, though their toys were finer. They had miniature knights carved from ivory, wooden castles, and small horses on wheels. They practiced jousting with toy lances and rode ponies in imitation of real knights. Girls in castles played music, read romances, or embroidered scenes from legends. Their games were gentler, but still filled with imagination. One popular pastime among noble boys was falconry, though it was more training than play. They learned how to care for birds of prey, how to feed them, and how to send them flying after quarry. It was seen as preparation for manhood, just as spinning and sewing were for girls. But even in the grandest castle, laughter sounded the same. The giggle of a child chasing a ball echoed through the halls, much like it did through the muddy streets of a village. Not all adults approved of too much play. Priests sometimes preached that children should be more serious and pious, that idle games led to sin. Yet, even they knew that childhood needed joy. After all, even monks remembered what it felt like to run barefoot on a summer day. As night fell, the games ended. Children gathered by the fire, rubbing their tired feet, listening to stories told by elders. Maybe a tale of dragons, saints, or foolish kings. The flicker of the flames danced across their faces, and for a moment, all the hardship of medieval life faded away. In their dreams, they continued to play, running across endless meadows, laughing in the sunlight, free from work, hunger, and fear. Even in a world of struggle, laughter found a way to survive. Family in the Middle Ages was not about comfort and privacy the way it is today. It was about survival, obedience, and duty. It was a small unit held together by faith, labor, and tradition, where every member, even a child, had a purpose. Imagine stepping inside a medieval home at dawn. The air smells of smoke and damp straw. The family rises with the first light, the rooster's crow echoing across the village. The father pulls on rough wool clothes, the mother stirs the fire, and the children rub sleep from their eyes, ready to help. There is no gentle morning routine, no time for leisure. Everyone has work to do. The father, called the head of the household, is responsible for providing food, discipline, and protection. His word is law inside the home. The mother oversees the running of the house, cooking, spinning, cleaning, and teaching the daughters how to do the same. Children were not seen as little angels or as free spirits, but as small adults in training. From the moment they could walk, they were expected to obey, to learn, and to work. Love existed, but it was shown through responsibility rather than affection. Parents cared deeply, but they rarely said so. If a child was disobedient, punishment came swiftly. A slap, a scolding, or being sent outside to do extra chores. Physical discipline was normal, and few questioned it. The Bible was often quoted to justify it, reminding parents that he who spares the rod spoils the child. It was believed that correction built character, and that hardship prepared one for the real world. But despite the sternness, there were softer moments. A mother singing quietly while she weaves. A father carving a small toy from wood. A child sitting in his mother's lap as she tells stories about saints or beasts. These moments were rare but precious. Families were large, partly because many children did not survive infancy. Losing a child was common, but that did not mean parents felt nothing. Church records and letters from the time show grief, quiet and deep, when a little one died. Yet life had to go on, and the family still needed to work, eat, and pray. In peasant homes, the family's survival depended on teamwork. Older siblings cared for younger ones, fetched water, watched the fire, or tended animals. When harvest time came, everyone helped in the fields. A 10-year-old could be trusted to drive oxen or guard crops. Childhood and adulthood overlapped, the line between them blurry and short. In towns, merchant families worked together in workshops. A father might be a shoemaker or blacksmith, and his sons learned his trade. The workshop was both home and school. Daughters helped with shopkeeping, sewing, or selling goods in the market. A child's worth was tied to how useful they could be. For noble families, the pattern was different but still strict. Children were raised by servants or tutors, sometimes even sent away to other households. A young noble boy might be fostered in another castle to learn manners, riding, and swordplay. A girl might be sent to a convent to be educated in music, embroidery, and faith. This was seen as part of building alliances, not abandonment. Fostering built connections between noble families and taught children discipline. They learned to bow, to speak politely, to obey their superiors, and to carry themselves with dignity. When they returned home years later, they were ready to take their place in the hierarchy of noble life. Religion shaped every part of family structure. The church taught that parents ruled by divine order, that fathers represented authority, and that children owed obedience as a form of worship. Every morning and night, prayers were said together. Families blessed food, thanked God for health, and confessed sins as a unit. Even marriages were not built around romance. Most were arranged for practical reasons: land, alliances, or survival. Yet within that framework, affection sometimes grew. A man and woman might come to care for each other after years of shared work and hardship. In poor homes, marriages could be informal at first, sealed later by the church once a priest visited the village. In noble families, weddings were grand, filled with feasts and processions. But whether in a cottage or a castle, the expectations were the same: loyalty, duty, and the hope of children to carry on the name. Children watched and learned. They learned that their father's word was law, that the church's word was higher still, and that obedience was safety. Questioning parents or priests could lead to punishment, or even accusations of sin. But within these rules, there was still affection, often quiet and unspoken. A child might remember the warmth of their mother's hands as she patched their tunic, or the pride in their father's eyes after a long day of good work. They might fall asleep beside the fire, listening to their parents' low voices, feeling safe beneath a thin wool blanket. Despite the distance that sometimes existed between generations, family was everything. When hunger struck, it was the family that shared food. When sickness came, it was the family that cared for the weak. And when death took someone away, the family prayed together for their soul. Even the smallest child knew the strength of that bond. It was the thread that tied them to the world, even when the world was harsh. In every cottage, every castle, every cloister, the medieval family was the foundation of life. Strict, structured, sometimes cold, but held together by faith, work, and the simple wish to endure. In the Middle Ages, work began almost as soon as a child could stand. Childhood as we know it today did not really exist. There were no long years of schooling or play before becoming an adult. Instead, work was the center of life, and children were slowly drawn into it from their earliest memories. Picture the morning air filled with the sounds of tools clanging, animals bleating, and footsteps in the mud. A small boy carries a wooden pail of water almost as big as himself. A girl kneels beside her mother, learning how to spin wool with clumsy fingers. Work was not a punishment, it was survival, and survival was the most important lesson of all. For peasant families, labor began at home. Little ones helped gather firewood, collect eggs, or scare crows from crops. By 7 or 8, they could milk goats, feed pigs, or weave baskets. Each small task mattered. A family that wasted hands wasted time, and time was food. A day of work started early and ended late. There were few breaks, except for meals or prayer. The rhythm of life followed the seasons. Ploughing in spring, harvesting in autumn, mending and spinning through the long winter months. Children learned by watching their parents, copying every move until the skill became their own. But for many, home was only the beginning. As soon as a child reached 10 or 12, they might be sent away to become an apprentice or a servant. This was often a proud moment, a sign that they were growing up. Yet it was also a farewell. Parents hugged their children goodbye, hoping they would be treated kindly by their masters. Apprenticeship was the doorway into skilled work. Boys trained under craftsmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, masons, or tailors. Girls sometimes learned weaving, spinning, or midwifery. In exchange for years of labor, the child received food, shelter, and training. Money rarely changed hands. The true payment came later, when the apprentice became skilled enough to work independently. An apprentice's life was hard. They were the first to wake and the last to rest. They cleaned the workshop, fetched supplies, and obeyed every order from the master. Mistakes were punished with harsh words, sometimes even blows. Yet slowly, through repetition and pain, they learned the craft, how to shape iron, mix mortar, or cut cloth straight and clean. In towns, guilds controlled all skilled trades. They decided who could work, who could sell, and how apprentices were trained. Becoming a full member, called a journeyman, was a long process. After years of service, the apprentice had to prove his skill by creating a masterpiece, a final project that showed true craftsmanship. Only then could he open his own shop. Many never reached that level. Some stayed as servants or laborers all their lives, earning enough only to survive. Yet even that was better than starving. For a peasant child, an apprenticeship meant food, shelter, and a future. Girls had different paths. While some entered convents or served in noble households, most worked beside their mothers or as domestic servants. They learned to cook, clean, and sew, preparing for marriage or employment. In towns, they might work in bakeries, taverns, or textile workshops. In cities like Florence or London, hundreds of young girls worked spinning thread or weaving cloth for tiny wages. Work was not only a duty, but also a way of belonging. In a world divided by class, being part of a trade or household gave a child identity and protection. The master stood in place of the father, guiding and disciplining. Fellow apprentices became like brothers, sharing laughter, food, and punishment. Of course, not all masters were kind. Some overworked their apprentices or withheld food. Others made promises they never kept. There were laws to protect apprentices, but they were rarely enforced. A child who ran away from a cruel master might be caught and dragged back. Others simply disappeared into the streets, surviving by begging or stealing. Work also carried danger. Blacksmiths inhaled smoke and sparks. Carpenters lost fingers. And weavers went blind from dim light. Farming children risked being kicked by animals or crushed by carts. The body grew old before its time. Many adults in their 30s already felt ancient, worn down by years of hard labor. Still, there was pride in work. A mason could look at a stone wall and say, "I built that." A girl who wove fine linen could see her cloth sold in the market. Skill brought respect, and even the poorest worker took comfort in being useful. For noble children, work took a different shape. Boys trained as squires, learning to ride horses, care for armor, and serve knights. They woke early, polished weapons, and practiced archery. The work was physical and disciplined, preparing them for the life of a warrior. Girls learned household management, sewing, and courtly manners, so they could one day run great estates. Even the church required work. Monks and nuns lived by the rule of ora et labora, pray and work. Children sent to monasteries or convents rose before dawn to copy manuscripts, tend gardens, or bake bread. Work was seen as holy labor, a way to serve God. No matter where a child was born, work shaped their body, their faith, and their future. It taught patience, endurance, and humility. It could be cruel, but it also gave purpose. When night came, the sound of tools faded and the air grew quiet. Children fell asleep still smelling of hay, smoke, or iron dust. Their dreams were filled with the rhythm of work, the swing of the hammer, the crackle of the fire, the murmur of prayers before dawn. And when morning came, they rose again, ready to continue the endless cycle of labor that defined medieval life. Work was not just survival. It was identity. It was meaning. It was life itself. In the Middle Ages, religion was not just a belief system. It was the framework of life itself. From the moment a child was born, the church surrounded them. It shaped how people thought, spoke, ate, and even how they imagined the world beyond death. For a medieval child, faith was as constant as the sunrise, and fear of sin was a shadow that never truly left. Imagine a small stone church standing in the center of a village. Its bell tolls every morning, calling the people to prayer. Inside, the air smells of incense and candle wax. The priest speaks in Latin, words few understand but everyone respects. A child watches his mother bow her head, and he copies her movements. Even before he knows what faith means, he learns that obedience and humility are sacred. Baptism was a baby's first protection. Priests taught that without it, a soul could never enter heaven. So parents rushed to have their newborns baptized within days, sometimes even hours, of birth. The ceremony was both joyful and anxious, for death was always near, and parents feared losing an unbaptized child. After baptism, the church continued to guide every stage of life. Children learned to make the sign of the cross, to pray before meals, and to kneel in confession. Religion gave order to a dangerous world. Every illness, storm, or famine was believed to be a message from God. Every misfortune had a reason, even if it could not be seen. The fear of sin shaped how children were raised. Theologians like St. Augustine taught that even babies carried the mark of original sin, inherited from Adam and Eve's disobedience in the Garden of Eden. To medieval parents, this meant that discipline was not only about behavior, it was about saving the soul. A child who disobeyed might be punished not just to teach obedience, but to guide them towards salvation. Punishment, therefore, was often severe, but seen as necessary. Beatings were common, not out of hatred, but out of fear. Fear that a spoiled child would fall into sin. Spare the rod, spoil the child was taken literally. To be too kind was to endanger the soul. But not all teachings were harsh. The church also spoke of mercy, kindness, and love. Children learned the stories of saints, martyrs, and angels. They were told of St. Nicholas, who secretly gave gold to poor families, and St. Margaret, who protected women in childbirth. These tales gave hope and comfort, showing that goodness could overcome suffering. Superstition lived side by side with faith. Even priests believed in charms and omens. A child might wear a small cross or a piece of holy relic to ward off evil. Mothers whispered prayers against the evil eye, a curse believed to come from jealousy or anger. People sprinkled holy water in fields to protect crops, or hung herbs above the door to keep away sickness. For children, the world was full of unseen powers, angels, demons, and spirits that moved through the shadows. Every flickering candle or creaking door could be a sign. If lightning struck a barn, people said it was punishment for pride. If a child recovered from illness, it was a miracle. Education, where it existed, was also shaped by religion. In monasteries and cathedral schools, boys learned to read Latin so they could copy the scriptures. The sound of chanting filled the air as young monks practiced hymns. Writing was done slowly, with quills on parchment, each letter a prayer. Knowledge was sacred, and to study was to serve God. Girls rarely received the same education. Some learned prayers and psalms at home, while others entered convents to study reading, sewing, and singing. Life in a convent could be peaceful and safe compared to the dangers of the outside world. Yet even there, strict rules governed every hour. Prayer at dawn, work through the day, silence at night. The church calendar filled the year with rhythm. Feasts and fasts marked time. Advent, Easter, Lent, and Christmas. On holy days, work paused, and even the poorest families tried to celebrate. For children, these days were a rare joy, a chance to rest, play, or taste special food. Festivals mixed faith and fun. In some villages, plays told Bible stories, with children dressed as angels or shepherds. But religion also brought fear. The idea of hell was vivid and terrifying. Preachers described it in detail: endless fire, darkness, and torment for sinners. Even young children heard these stories, learning early that every lie or act of disobedience could lead to eternal suffering. Heaven, by contrast, was a place of music and light. To reach it meant living a good and faithful life. Confession became a way to clear the soul. Children were taught to examine their conscience, to recall their mistakes and admit them before a priest. It could be frightening, but it was also comforting to believe that forgiveness was possible. When sickness came, people turned to both prayer and superstition. A child might be told to drink holy water or sleep with a saint's relic beneath the pillow. During the plague, families prayed to Saint Roche, believed to protect against disease. Some carried charms shaped like crosses or bones. Desperation made faith stronger. Religion was not only a private matter, it was the glue that held society together. The church recorded births, marriages, and deaths. It cared for the poor, taught the young, and buried the dead. For a medieval child, faith was the background music of life, sometimes soothing, sometimes frightening, but always there. And while fear of sin was powerful, so was the belief in redemption. The idea that even the worst sinner could be forgiven gave people hope. In a world filled with hardship, that hope was everything. At night, when the candles burned low, a child might whisper a final prayer before sleep, a plea for safety, forgiveness, and the promise of waking up to another day. Faith guided every heartbeat, every choice, every dream. To be a medieval child was to live under the watchful eyes of both heaven and earth. When we imagine childhood in the Middle Ages, it is easy to think only of hardship, labor, and strict discipline. Yet even in a world of danger and duty, there were moments of joy. Children played, laughed, told stories, and found small escapes from the weight of adult expectations. Their games and tales carried echoes of a simpler time, when wonder could still bloom amid stone walls and muddy streets. Imagine a small village on a spring afternoon. The air smells faintly of smoke and wild herbs. A group of children run barefoot across the green, chasing one another with sticks and shouts. Their laughter mixes with the clatter of chickens and the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. For a little while, work and worry are forgotten. Play was part of every childhood, no matter the class. The toys were simple: wooden dolls, carved animals, hoops, balls made from stitched rags, or bones used like dice. Wealthy children might have painted figurines or toy soldiers, but most relied on imagination. A few scraps of cloth could become a royal cloak. A branch could serve as a sword, and a patch of dirt could transform into a castle courtyard. Many games were shared by all ages. Tag, hide and seek, and leapfrog were common. In winter, children slid across frozen ponds using bones tied to their shoes, a form of early ice skating. Boys often played mock battles with sticks and shields, imitating knights and heroes from the stories they heard. Girls might play house, making tiny feasts of pebbles and flowers. Not all games were safe. Some involved wrestling, throwing stones, or mock sword fights that could end in real injuries. But danger was part of daily life, and a few scrapes were rarely cause for concern. Adults might scold, but only if play interrupted work. Evenings were a time for storytelling. In homes lit by firelight, families gathered as the day's labor ended. Someone, often the oldest member, would begin to speak. Their voice was steady, and the children listened closely, eyes wide. These stories were the entertainment of the Middle Ages. No screens, no books, just words weaving through the room like magic. Some stories were heroic, filled with knights, dragons, and quests. Others were moral, teaching lessons about honesty, courage, and faith. A few were funny, full of mischief and clever tricks. These tales passed from mouth to mouth, growing and changing over generations. One of the most popular collections of such tales was the Book of the Knight of the Tower, written in 1371 by Geoffrey de la Tour Landry for his daughters. It was not a bedtime storybook in the modern sense, but it was meant to guide young minds. Geoffrey warned his daughters about smooth-talking men at court, about vanity, and about losing their family's honor. His tone was stern but caring. He wanted his daughters to survive in a world where mistakes could ruin lives. The book became widely known across Europe. It was translated into English by William Caxton in the late 1400s, and into German and Dutch soon after. In Germany, a nobleman named Marquard von Stein copied it for his own daughters, Elsa and Jacovia. Such works show that even in an age of harshness, parents worried about their children's futures. Other books and stories for children had a more spiritual tone. The Mirror of Good Manners taught proper behavior. The Alphabet of Tales told short moral stories to shape the conscience. Though most children never read these books themselves, their lessons were passed down by parents, tutors, or priests. Music and rhyme were also a part of childhood. Children sang simple songs while working or playing. Some of these rhymes, like Ring-a-Ring-a-Roses, may even have roots in this era. Music was everywhere, in churches, at fairs, and in homes. Instruments like flutes, drums, and small harps were common, and even the poorest families sometimes made their own. Festivals were the high points of the year. During feasts such as Easter or Christmas, children were allowed rare treats. Bread sweetened with honey, roasted nuts, or bits of meat. They might dance in the square, watch traveling performers, or take part in pageants that reenacted Bible stories. On May Day, young people decorated trees with ribbons and flowers. In harvest season, they joined adults in singing songs of thanks for the crops. These celebrations gave rhythm to life and created memories that lasted long after the fields turned quiet again. For wealthy children, play sometimes took the form of education. Boys practiced riding horses, fencing, or hunting with falcons. Girls learned embroidery, music, and the graceful movements expected at court. While these lessons prepared them for adult life, they also offered pleasure and pride. A well-stitched cloth or a perfect song could feel like a victory. Even in monasteries and convents, children found small ways to play. They might skip pebbles in the courtyard, share riddles, or whisper stories under their breath. Monks tolerated this as long as it did not disturb prayer or study. Laughter, after all, was not forbidden. It was simply expected to be quiet. The smallest joys often came from companionship. A shared loaf of bread, a kind word, a walk by the river. These were treasures in a world where comfort was rare. Many friendships formed during childhood lasted a lifetime. At night, before sleep, stories continued. Some were meant to calm, tales of saints and angels. Others carried a hint of fear, warnings about ghosts, witches, or wandering spirits. These bedtime tales were both lessons and lullabies, reminders that the world was mysterious and that good behavior kept evil away. So even though Philippe Ariès once claimed that the idea of childhood did not exist, the truth is more complicated. Medieval children may not have had the same freedom or comfort as modern ones, but they did play, dream, and imagine. They found wonder in simple things. The sound of the wind through the fields, the warmth of the fire, or a story well told. Their laughter, echoing across centuries, reminds us that joy finds its place even in the hardest times. The laughter of childhood could vanish quickly in the Middle Ages. The same child who played in the mud one morning might face a sharp scolding, or even a beating by evening. Discipline was not just common, it was considered essential. Adults believed that strict correction built character, kept souls pure, and maintained order in a world full of temptation and danger. To understand this, we have to remember how people thought about human nature. Medieval Christians believed that children, like all humans, were born sinful. The soul was pure only through obedience and faith. Disobedience, laziness, or disrespect were not small matters. They were seen as signs of moral weakness that could lead a person toward eternal punishment. So parents, teachers, and priests believed it was their duty to correct children firmly. The most common tool of discipline was the rod, a thin stick or switch used for striking. Proverbs from the Bible were often quoted to justify it. The most famous was from the book of Proverbs. "He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline him." That verse was repeated for centuries. At home, the father was usually the one who punished, though mothers could too. A child might be struck on the hands, legs, or backside. Sometimes punishment came from shame rather than pain. Being made to kneel on hard peas, stand in the corner, or wear a symbol of their wrongdoing, like a wooden sign or donkey ears. In schools, discipline was often even harsher. A teacher might beat a student for mistakes in reading or writing, for talking too much, or for not paying attention. In monasteries where young boys studied, silence and obedience were considered sacred. Monks believed that a quick strike could save a soul from pride or idleness. There are old writings from teachers who described their methods with surprising honesty. A 13th century English schoolmaster named Alexander of Neckham advised that children must be chastised, but never out of wrath. He saw discipline as love, controlled, purposeful, and meant to help. But not every teacher followed such restraint. Some struck without mercy, using whips, rods, or even knotted cords. Students feared the birch, a bundle of thin twigs soaked in water to make them sting more sharply. In some schools, the birch hung on the wall as a warning, always visible. A single mistake could bring a dozen strikes. Yet many parents accepted this, believing it built strength and respect. Even noble children, raised with tutors and manners, were not spared. The idea that softness ruined character was deeply rooted. A noble boy who refused lessons or showed arrogance might be caned, just as a peasant child might be whipped for neglecting chores. Punishment was also tied to religion. Confession and penance were spiritual forms of discipline. A child who lied or stole might be told to pray, fast, or wear rough clothing as a sign of repentance. This blending of physical and spiritual correction shaped how the Middle Ages viewed childhood, not as a carefree phase, but as training for eternal salvation. Despite the severity, discipline was not always cruel. Many parents and teachers truly believed they were showing care. To them, pain taught lessons faster than words. A well-behaved child brought honor to the family, while a disobedient one brought shame. Honor was everything, especially among the nobility. A single act of disrespect could stain a name for years. The church reinforced these values. Sermons often spoke about obedience as a path to heaven. Children were taught that Christ himself obeyed his parents, and that rebellion mirrored the sin of Adam. Stories of saints sometimes included examples of early discipline, a holy child, refusing food until he finished his prayers, or one who fasted for days after a small lie. Still, some voices began to question the harshness. In the 14th century, a few clerics wrote that excessive punishment could drive children to fear rather than virtue. A Dominican friar named Vincent of Beauvais advised moderation, saying that too much fear destroys love. His words were rare but important. They hinted that compassion could guide discipline just as well as severity. For poorer families, punishment was often practical. A child who failed to help with crops or livestock risked causing real harm. A missed chore might mean lost food or injured animals. Parents did not see punishment as cruelty, but as protection, a way to keep the household alive. Some tasks were dangerous. Children might lead oxen through muddy fields, fetch water from icy rivers, or carry heavy loads. A single mistake could lead to injury. So scolding and beating were ways to teach caution, even if the lessons were painful. There was also emotional discipline, the withdrawal of affection or attention. A cold stare, silence, or public shame could wound more deeply than a beating. In villages and towns where reputation mattered, being known as the disobedient one was humiliating. Yet not all discipline came from adults. Older children were often given authority over younger ones, especially in large households or workshops. Apprentices learned from masters who used both words and blows to shape skill and obedience. The first years of apprenticeship were sometimes the hardest, filled with humiliation and constant correction. Despite everything, children learned resilience. They grew up in a world where survival required toughness, where comfort was a rare luxury, and where respect for authority kept society from falling into chaos. It is easy now to judge their world as cruel, but for them, discipline was the boundary between order and ruin. Some children likely understood love through correction. A father's hand that struck could also build, guide, or feed. A mother who scolded harshly might still sing softly when the day was done. Life was complex, full of contradictions. In the dim glow of a fire, after punishment was done, a child might still curl close to the warmth of their family. The same home that demanded obedience also offered safety from the cold and dark beyond its walls. So, discipline was not just about pain. It was about preparing young souls to face a hard world. And though many tears were shed, those lessons shaped the strength that adulthood required. And so, our quiet journey through the childhoods of the Middle Ages comes to an end. You have walked through muddy village streets, heard the scrape of quills in candlelight, and felt the chill of stone walls where children once slept. You have seen how they worked beside their parents, learned from their masters, and tried to find small moments of joy in a hard and uncertain world. Their lives were short, their days often filled with duty, yet they laughed, dreamed, and hoped just as we do. Though centuries have passed, the sound of a child's laughter or the warmth of a mother's hand has never really changed. As you rest now, think of how far we have come. You sleep in safety, with comfort and warmth that most of them could never imagine. The past may be distant, but its echoes remind us how precious simple peace can be. If you enjoyed this calm walk through history, take a moment to subscribe to Boring History for Sleep, where we explore more gentle journeys into the forgotten corners of the past. You can leave a comment to tell us where in the world you're listening from, or share what time in history you'd like to visit next. For now, close your eyes. Let the sounds of the present fade and drift softly into rest, carrying with you the quiet memories of children who once lived long ago. Good night, traveller, and we'll meet again in another Boring History for Sleep.